Well, things certainly seem to be a lot worse in Hong Kong. I can't say I'm surprised. I never really had much hope for the situation there, I'm sad to say. But, what really are the people there to do? They were sold out by the British a long time ago. If you had asked me, and of course I wasn't, I was barely born when the British handed over Hong Kong to the Chinese, but I mean, it should have been pretty obvious that if you hand over a relatively freely governed territory to a communist dictatorship, that in time, no matter what sort of parchment protections you enact, there's going to be an integration of that territory into the mother country. And so it was inevitable that Hong Kong would become just as unfree as China. I guess the hope at the time was that things would be the other way around, that China would become as free as Hong Kong, but frankly, I don't know how people could have thought that. At least not as long as the current government of China is in place. Sure, maybe after the communists are gone, China could start moving in the direction towards Hong Kong and actually get pretty darn close to it. But that certainly wasn't going to happen as long as the current people are in power. The way you enforce a true single-party state is by making sure that there is no real opposition. And so that's what that new national security law that they passed in Beijing aims to achieve in Hong Kong, is to make sure that opposition to the government is a crime. That is, a pretty obvious and basic goal of, these types of governments. And you could say, well, under the British, Hong Kong didn't have an elected government either. They were, completely controlled by London. But the thing is that the UK, in the latter half of the 20th century, was not a particularly despotic country at home, and so therefore they were very kind to their overseas territories. They still are. You go to the Falkland Islands, and you don't feel like you're living under an evil empire. But it would be hypocritical for China to govern a mere territory more freely than they do, their own country and their own people. So the subjugation of the people of Hong Kong was a matter of when, not if. And it would appear now that that subjugation is starting to enter its final phase. Expressing anti-state opinions at protests is now illegal. Expressing those opinions, period, is now illegal. And in fact, the way that this law is written, because we don't know that much about it yet, because it was just enacted in the text, to my knowledge, is not public. Nobody seems to know exactly what it says, but apparently one of the features is that these folks in Hong Kong who, break the Chinese national security law can be tried in Chinese mainland courts, because that's, where the law is from. And of course, mainland Chinese courts have not even a semblance of impartiality. So, what are the people's options at this point? Sure, they got out in the streets and protested, and I'm happy to see that. A lot of people were defying the law, and were showing they don't have fear. 2 folks were arrested, and they're probably going to receive very, very harsh penalties, especially because one of them was carrying the independence flag, according to Zero Hedge. And if that's true, I'm sure they're going to want to throw the book at him, because that is a direct, about as direct of a display of contempt for China that I could imagine. Remember that when you live under a regime that you have no control really to modify or change, your only real recourse if you're in the opposition is to call for regime change. Well, if you call for regime change, well, then you're a threat to the national security because, you want to tear down the state. In the United States, our government isn't exactly friendly to dissidents who want to tear down the United States either. But at least within the U.S. system, there's a little bit more of room for disagreement before you have to get to the part to where you say, okay, let's just throw the whole thing out. And so there is even though I don't hold up the Western countries as some great ideal and say that they're perfect and that they have total freedom, because they don't. But the fact is that there's a wide gulf between the Western countries and China. Because in China, the Overton window really is so much smaller. And I complain about the Overton window in the United States being incredibly narrow, to the point to where, Joe Lieberman and John McCain are seen as, different sides of the aisle when they're really the same person. Now, apparently something that, the normies in Hong Kong who are not, risking their, their lives basically and going out in the streets to defy the government, the folks who really just want to live normal lives, they are trying to erase any trace that they ever supported any of this kind of stuff off of their social media. And there was a video that I saw of a guy, I guess he owned a restaurant or something, and there were people who had, taped pro-independence posters on his window, and the way it was done implied that, he supported them before, but now this national security law passed, he wanted to rip them all off his window so that, there was no pro-independence propaganda anywhere, associated with them. And I don't condemn these folks. I don't think they're cowards. I don't think they're bad people. I think these are actually very good people. These are the kind of folks you'd want to be your neighbors, because they just want to live their lives. And it's sad to see them caught up in all this. They're the innocents in my eyes. Hong Kong really was a special place, in the whole world. It was much freer than most Western countries. It's sad to see it go like this, but it's not surprising. It's certainly not sudden. It's taken a long time to get here. Margaret Thatcher bulldozed the Kowloon walled city back in the 1980s to clean up the riffraff, as a gift to her friend, the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, Kowloon walled city was, sort of a very free enclave of Hong Kong, and I won't get into the detailed story of it, but that really, to me, was the start of the erosion of the end of Hong Kong. That was, the freest, totally ungoverned place on earth. It really, puts the LARPing of these folks in Chaz into perspective, because the folks who moved to the Kowloon walled city really did build an autonomous zone within their city out of nothing. But ever since, Hong Kong's been losing its edge. It's being processed and refined and turned really into just a normal, modern Chinese city. Just, a bunch of sparkly skyscrapers, where everyone is, wearing a Western business suit but has very mild opinions and doesn't say anything, too surprising. There's going to be pretty soon, a less vibrant culture. People will be much more subdued. Whereas it used to be the crossroads of the world. You could go to Hong Kong and buy just about anything, because, everything sort of flowed through there. I really regret not having, been born in the time to see it in its full glory back in, I would probably say, like the 70s or the 80s. That, to me, is sort of the, in reading about this topic, the golden age when Hong Kong was what people think of Hong Kong as. You had that stark contrast between, the wealth and the opulence of Hong Kong, the very, high level of social mobility. People who, started and lived with absolute dirt that could rise up to become, millionaires. And then just over the border in China, you had, abject poverty. So I think that's about all I have to say on this topic for today. If you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.